Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. You talk about the followers of this movement deferred to a leader they believe has been anointed by God. They embrace the illusion that the righteous will be saved, floating naked upwards into heaven, which isn't a bad way to float to heaven, at the end of time, and the secularists they despise will perish. This retreat into magical thinking, which is the foundation of all totalitarian movements, explains their suffering. It helps them cope with despair and anxiety. It gives them the illusion of security. It also ensures retribution against a long list of enemies: liberals, intellectuals, gays, immigrants, the deep state, blamed for their economic and social misery. Some of those people actually deserve it, though. You say Karl Polanyi am I pronouncing that correctly? Polanyi?
Polanyi.
Polanyi, in The Great Transformation, writes that once a society surrenders to the dictates of the market, once its mafia economy becomes a mafia state, once it succumbs to what he calls the ravages of this satanic mill, it inevitably leads to the demolition of society. The mafia state cannot be reformed. We must organize to break our chains one by one, to use the power of the strike to cripple the state machinery. We must embrace a militant radicalism, one that offers a new vision and a new social structure. We must hold fast to moral imperatives. We must forgive mortgages and student debt, institute universal health care, and break up monopolies like BlackRock. We must raise the minimum wage and end the squandering of resources and funds to sustain the empire and the war industry. We must establish a nationwide jobs program to rebuild the country's collapsing infrastructure. As long as that jobs program doesn't come with imprisoning the Japanese like it did the first time. We must nationalize the banks, pharmaceutical corporations, military contractors, and transportation, and embrace environmentally sustainable energy sources. None of this will happen until we resist. And so I agree that the future and the hope is what you're talking about there, and what Shama talks about, workers uniting across, but it's got to be a class movement. It has to have a class critique.
That's right.
And it can't start with LGBTQ, and it can't start with white supremacy, and it has to just be class, right? Am I wrong about this?
That's right. Yeah, and that's why I was with Shama this weekend in Workers' Strike Back meeting she had in Seattle, because she embraces that, and so do I. I remember once talking to Ralph Nader, and he said, look, who cares whether they support Trump or they don't support Trump? If you're trying to organize a union for a Walmart, he said, that's what we've got to do. We've got to organize unions to confront Walmart and Amazon. And of course, we're going to, if especially in Walmarts and probably in Amazon distribution centers as well, you're going to run into a lot of Trump supporters. But the point is to challenge the real centers of power, which are corporate or oligarchic. And that in and of itself, these are Nader's words, is an educational process, because when these centers of powers react, they teach you who has power and what the cost of confronting power is. But yes, I know you've long said this, Jimmy. I'm in total agreement. This is where Shama's coming from. It's also something I've always said. These woke campaigns, this kind of virtue signaling has just been an effective way to sever us, in particular from the white working class. And that, whose interest does that serve? Ask yourself.
That's right. Who benefits? And I was also educated on this by Christian Parente when he told me that this isn't, this stuff didn't start 5 minutes ago, 5 years ago, or 20 years ago, that this started immediately after World War II, when the deep state got in bed with the NGOs like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation, and they pushed identity politics. And whenever there was a class movement, that they always tried to sabotage that. Right? They didn't kill Martin Luther King because he integrated the lunch counters, right? That they all made money off of that, and they're never. But when he did a poor people's march on Washington D.C., he didn't do a black people's march. He did a poor people's march. Same thing with Malcolm X. He realized it wasn't black white. Same thing with Fred Hampton. So I'm with this. So that's why I like, so, a lot of times people have criticized you for being a doomsayer, right? But what you're doing is you're accurately identifying the problem, but you are often criticized because you wouldn't give people a solution. Well, there it is. So there's the solution. You got the solution, and people need that. I've been preaching this everywhere I go, on stage, off stage, on my show, that, we need to come together. My neighbor is not my enemy. My neighbor is suffering under the same oligarchy that I'm suffering under, and we have a common enemy, and we need to come together to fight that common enemy.
Yeah, well, so at the end of my book, American Fascists, I write that, because I went there with a liberal bias, towards these people. But when I heard their stories of dislocation, evictions, sexual, domestic abuse, substance abuse, you'd have to be heartless not to feel for them and the train wreck of their lives that many of them endured. And at the end of the book, I said, look, you're not going to argue these people out of their magical thinking, because it's the only thing they have left to cope with a world that has been unremittently hostile towards their existence. You have to reintegrate them economically into the society, give them a sense of stability, give them a sense of worth, give them enough of an income where they can have dignity and a sense of meritocracy. And I said, short of that, the movement will only expand and grow. So it's always rooted in that economic issue, and why we have to recover the language of class war. And I think people. You're right that they criticize me, but I've been saying this for a really long time. But that's the thing they don't want to hear, because every election cycle they get seduced by the giant propaganda machine, and they have to vote for Barack Obama or Kamala Harris or whoever it is who is within that dead system, that dead zone, that really is not only not going to assist them, but is their enemy. And these people are not. The Democratic Party leadership is not a friend of the working class. The Republican Party isn't either, but neither is the Democrats. They sold us out in the worst way. We should have walked out on the Democratic Party in 1994 with NAFTA. We should have turned our backs on them.
100%, yes. But Bill Clinton was, and the media was on his side on that. So that's the problem. And so we, places like your show, this show, Glenn Greenwald, that we're the antidote to that media, and that's why they try to suppress us. And you've been deplatformed plenty, and we always have to look over our shoulders for debanking. Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.